This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Identity Crisis is a weekly podcast from the Shalom Hartman Institute, creating better conversations about the essential issues facing Jewish life. Host Yehuda Kurtzer, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, sits down with a wide range of guests like Israeli politician Yair Golan, author Dara Horn, writers Franklin Foer and Sarah Hurwitz to discuss current events, Jewish values, and the big questions facing Jewish life. What we really love about this podcast is Yehuda's genuine curiosity about the variety of guests and critical issues he covers, everything from what it means to be a Jewish leader during this divisive moment to the experience of being Palestinian in Israel today. You can find Identity Crisis with Yehuda Kurtzer wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to This Day, a history podcast from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, May 20th, 1775, we are continuing to check in with some 250th anniversary stories. A month ago, we talked about Lexington and Concord and some of the lesser-known battles around that time. And today, 1 month after those skirmishes in Massachusetts, we cut to North Carolina, where Colonel Thomas Polk decides to declare that that colony is free of British rule. Or so the story goes. The so-called Mecklenburg Declaration was a useful story throughout the fight for independence and continues to be a big source of pride for Tar Heels to this day. The official seal and flag of North Carolina display the date, May 20th, 1775. But we love a compare and contrast on this show between the story of history and what actually went down. And this is a good one. Here to help us do that is our special guest, Jeremy Markovich, writer and journalist based in North Carolina, who writes a newsletter and hosts a podcast called North Carolina Rabbit Hole. Jeremy, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And here, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Kellie, battling a little bit of a cold here, but we appreciate you going down the rabbit hole with us. Jeremy, let's start with the most apocryphal, simple, rah-rah, fifth grade history class version of this story. Basically, like you're standing at the top of the rabbit hole and you haven't jumped in. No research, no controversy. What do North Carolinians like to tell themselves about the Mecklenburg Declaration?
We just like to say we were first.
Oh, yeah?
That's kind of the thing, you know? Like, everybody's like, oh, you know the one that's really popular? Well, guess who did it before them?
Uh-huh.
It was us. And so, yeah, that's kind of the overall version is that, you know, the Declaration of Independence that we all know, the one that sits in the National Archives, some folks in Mecklenburg County, which is where Charlotte is, you know, basically came up with their own version. They got really mad. They were upset, and they said, you know what? We're not waiting for anybody else to do this. We're just going to do it ourselves. And the story goes that they wrote it up. They gave it to a dude named Captain Jack, who, not Jack Sparrow, but his last name was Jack.
That was my image.
I know. I get it every time. And so this guy then like hopped on a horse, rode all the way to Philadelphia, and delivered it. But that's like, okay, great. The major problem with that story is that nobody can find this thing. So you're like looking for it. People have tried to find it. They've seen copies of it. There was basically the reason why we think that we know it exists is because there was another copy sort of that surfaced or was, you know, replicated, whatever, like, you know, more than like a half a decade later, or half a century later, I should say. And so there's a lot of stuff sort of pointing at this, but there's no this.
Right.
And so that is always the hard part about this story is you say, okay, show me the source. And you can't definitively do that like you can do with a lot of other founding documents.
What I'm hearing, Jeremy, National Treasure 4.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm going to steal the MeckDec, even though nobody has actually found the MeckDec. So
I
you got
think
to
it's
find it and steal
stolen.
it.
You got to find it. Yeah.
So there is a little bit to know about what happens to the actual document itself and sort of how we get to this language. But let's linger in the tall tale for a moment. So first off, when you say we like to be first, I mean, to put a point on this, the idea here is that North Carolina jumps out ahead of basically all the other 13 colonies in a formal Declaration of Independence, basically a year before anyone else. Because, yes, there have been skirmishes in Massachusetts and battles, but no formal declaration. There's still this open question. The Continental Congress is dealing with this open question of, what is our relationship? And North Carolina, what's that, like Leroy Jenkins? Is that a very old reference? But North Carolina just goes storming in. Do you know this? Some internet reference.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So North Carolina just goes storming ahead and says, you know what? No, we're going to declare independence. I want to read from the purported language, and then we'll unpack it in a second. But it says, "We, the citizens of Mecklenburg County, do hereby dissolve the political bands which have connected us to the mother country, and hereby absolve ourselves from all allegiance to the British Crown." And it goes on for a while. Whether that specific language is true or not, does the idea that people in North Carolina would be inspired by what happened in Massachusetts and that North Carolina was a sort of hotbed of independent thought, does that scan?
Yeah, it does, just because, if you kind of look at the way that, Charlotte in particular was back then, there was a lot of folks who were kind of backcountry, and they were not happy about this. And the interesting thing to me today versus if you have been to Charlotte today, it's, a very different vibe than it would have been back then. Charlotte is a big banking town. Like everybody, if you walk around uptown Charlotte, a lot of bros wearing Brooks Brothers. It is not a revolutionary place, and yet it has been around for such a very, very long time. And so, in terms of this being kind of what Charlotte used to be, a more backwoods kind of, hotbed of rebellion. Yeah, that was really, really what they were back then. It's interesting to kind of trace that lineage back. There are hints of this when you walk around town. I mean, the Charlotte Hornets, named after, what Cornwallis called, Charlotte, kind of a hot, hornet's nest of rebellion.
Oh.
They have there's little hornets nests on the police cars there. I mean, like, they kind of tip their hat to it, what they used to be. But it really is a very different place now. And so I always think that's an interesting thing. You're celebrating a big revolution that happens in Charlotte.
It's funny because Boston and even Philadelphia, like, these are cities that pride themselves on historical preservation. Like, everywhere you go in the city, there are signs that point to something from the American Revolution. There's so much deep pride about seeing that I wonder, because we haven't commonly associated Charlotte as part of that narrative, it kind of falls through the cracks.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, there is a very nice, kind of cool looking statue of Captain James Jack. Like every city needs more statues of dudes riding a horse, I guess. But Charlotte finally went ahead and built one maybe like 20 years ago. So it doesn't really have that long history. Every interesting in Charlotte looks like it was built either in the 1990s or last night. And so you don't have that historical overt preservation. You don't walk around Charlotte going like, oh, I can feel I'm walking in the footsteps of the Revolutionary War soldiers. You kind of feel like, man, I'm kind of walking around in the late 90s, and also that apartment building looks really, really new. So it is a little bit of a disconnect, but it really, really was this history, and it is a celebration every single year of what happened. They really take it seriously.
This is not going to be in the episode as an aside, but if the bond markets continue to go the way they go, you might get another budget declaration from the finance bros of wanting to separate themselves from the federal government.
Yes.
But yes. One more beat before we then get to kind of picking apart whether this declaration actually was declared in the way that people like to tell the story. But Jack, our Captain Jack here, our main character, he does go to Philadelphia, and he does attend the Second Continental Congress, and he kind of shows up, and my impression is that people are largely like, hold on, like, slow your roll here, right?
Yeah. Everybody's telling him, like, hey, you don't need to do this. We're going to get there, right? Like, we're just going to do it. And really, like, this is a story of the folks in Mecklenburg County, the folks in, long ago Charlotte, kind of blowing up their spot and kind of forcing their hand a little bit and really trying to get them to do this. So, like, when he shows up, everybody's like, oh, fine, whatever. Okay, okay, you have this thing. Okay, I guess I have to read it. But it is really a testament to just sort of the backcountry folks out here who are really, really mad and angry and didn't want to wait for stuff to sort of naturally work itself out. They really wanted to get the ball rolling and put themselves on the line, really, to do that.
And so you had these 20 resolves, and they were about how the county was going to govern itself absent the British rule. And these, they were pretty radical for the time, but they were similar to other resolutions that were being floated in 1774 and 1775, where they were listing out some grievances, explaining how things had to change, and that if things changed, maybe we can keep this whole thing together. It's basically like the marriage counseling. We're working on trying to like keep this things together rather than just delivering divorce papers, which I think the Mecklenburg Declaration would have been.
I got to say, this dynamic between the Declaration and the resolves, and the Declaration being extremely forceful and almost provocative, and then the resolves being a little bit more like, let's negotiate, let's work this out. Gosh, that dynamic feels resonant to now. I mean, we are surrounded by politicians who love to like spout off and say something crazy and then walk it back a little bit or contextualize it or say, no, that was just an opening gambit. I mean, this feels like a tale almost as old as time. I don't know if it went out on Truth Social, but it feels like we have a Truth Social post and then we have all the kind of like white papers that try and clean up the mess after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, that's the dynamic of like you have sort of the safe play and the crazy play. And if you have them kind of both out at the same time, well, then, the safe play was like, you're asking for a lot of stuff here. That's really a lot of, I don't know if we could give you all that. But if it's like, compared to the crazy play, like, now you've moved the Overton window. Now, whatever you're asking for actually doesn't seem as bad as like totally declaring yourself independent and saying that, you're done with all of this. Like, okay, that's a little bit much. But we can go to the other thing, yeah.
Well, and while the resolutions still exist, we can look at them. There are copies of them, and a Declaration of Independence would have seemed quite radical in 1775. By the time you get to like the early 19th century, after the war with Britain, the War of 1812, suddenly there is a real pride in having been part of this declaratory moment.
Yeah.
And that is about the time that this copy of the Mecklenburg Declaration reappears in a Raleigh newspaper.
Yeah, and I think that's where you start to get this cynicism of what this thing is. Like, why is this just showing up now? Like, you wouldn't have said anything back then, but now you're happy to talk about it. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me about sort of this chapter is there's another very famous chapter of North Carolina's history in which every single state got a copy of the Bill of Rights, like the actual Bill of Rights, and like a national treasure. This one actually was stolen from the state of North Carolina back during the end of the Civil War, and so when they took it, it was just sitting in a cabinet in the State House somewhere.
Amazing.
Like nobody cared about it. They thought it was just like some old piece of paper. And it's only in more recent times when they actually physically recovered it that like now you're like, this is a valuable thing. Mm-hmm. So, it is entirely possible that this Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence was not a thing that like, hey, we're making a poster to be printed, and hang on your wall. This was a document that was designed to do something. Mm-hmm. It was a working piece of parchment or whatever it was on. And so it's only later that it actually has some value. And you're like, whatever happened to the original? Like, I don't know really what happened. There were stories about maybe it burned up in a house fire or whatever else. But the value of a physical document is maybe more of a recent thing than it was back then. So it's like, of course you didn't find it. Of course you didn't misplace it. Of course it went away, which is we look at it now being like, it'll be like saying something like, hey, the Constitution's kind of gone. I guess the cleaning crew got it or something like that. Like, it's just, you can't fathom that now, but back in the day, it was a declaration. It wasn't like a written law. It wasn't that sort of a thing. So when it pops back up, people are like, okay, fine. I guess maybe now you found it. Now that it's important, you have this copy of what you said. Okay. Your name's on it. Good for you.
Hey, can I let you in on something? Normal Gossip is back for its 8th season. Join new host Rachel Hampton as she shares the juiciest gossip from the real world. If you don't know Normal Gossip, this is the show about the petty, the ridiculous, the strange stories that surround us in the world and the way that we share those stories. Each episode, Rachel is joined by a special guest, and this season you're going to recognize a number of folks from the Radiotopia universe. It's time to get in on Normal Gossip, named one of the best podcasts of 2024 by Time Magazine and Vulture. You can find it now on all of your favorite platforms, and this September, Normal Gossip is going on tour. So start listening, get ready to check them out if they come near you this fall. You can find everything you need at normalgossiplive.com. So here's something that happens every year as it gets warmer. I put away my winter clothes, I take a look at my closet, and I think to myself, man, my rotation is pretty worn out. Same polos, same shorts, same lightweight pants as last year. So I have to buy a bunch of items to feel like I'm ready to embrace summer. Now, let me tell you about something that doesn't happen every year. Me getting compliments on the summer clothes that I purchased. But I am here to tell you, listener, that it has been happening ever since I refreshed my wardrobe with some items from Quince. Just last week on a taping of this show, Kellie said, "That's a really nice polo shirt." It is, and it's actually called a cotton silk polo sweater. It's got a nice little white trim, some great texture to the material. I've got these linen pants that are getting some compliments. They cost under $50, by the way. Same with the chore jacket I got. A friend of mine at the bar the other day reached over and did that little, "Ooh, this is nice" thing and felt the fabric. Listeners, this could be you. Quince's pieces are easy, elevated, and somehow make you feel more put together without even trying. Treat your closet to a little summer glow up with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. Tariffs, meme coins, Girl Scout cookies. What do these all have in common? Come on, folks. It's all about the money. Economics is everywhere and everything. It's fueling our lives, even where we least expect it. And look, if you listen to this day, that means I know that you are interested in context and the hidden stories that help explain our world. So I recommend to you that you listen to Planet Money from NPR. The Planet Money is a different kind of world where the complex economy actually makes sense. Human stories instead of abstract theories. It is econ brought down to earth. For me, going all the way back to 2008 and the giant pool of money, where Planet Money first helped me understand the financial crisis, I have relied on this show. It is accessible, it is fun, it's surprising. It's one of those shows that when you listen to it, you kind of think to yourself, why isn't this the only show that I listen to? Another great thing I'll tell you about Planet Money, they are absolute pioneers in the shorter podcast. It's about 30 minutes. You'll learn a lot. You get in, get out, nice and accessible. So it's time to check it out. Tune in to Planet Money every week for entertaining stories and insights about how money shapes our world. These are stories that cannot be found anywhere else. Listen now to Planet Money from NPR.
I mean, fires were really common back in the day, so the idea that it could have burned in a fire is probable, I think. But I think it's also interesting, like, so if it perishes in a fire, how does it get recreated? How do you kind of speak to, like, this documentation that we have that does exist? And how is it that some of the language in that document is also sort of parrots what we see in the Declaration of Independence as well, which I think is kind of interesting over, like, which comes first, sort of, in terms of the Declaration of Independence.
You said interesting. I think pretty damning.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this is there are a lot of things pointing to it, but the it isn't there. But there's a lot of things pointing to it, and I'm buddies with a guy named David Fleming who wrote a whole book about this, and he's a very nice guy. But he's very intimidating when you try to tell him that, like, hey, I don't think the MeckDec was real, and he's a pit bull. He won't let you go when you say that, and when you hear stuff like that, like, okay, there's a lot of evidence. Like, people were there. They show back up. They said I was there. There's so much circumstantial evidence, and people are like, oh, I had notes. I remember it. People's memories, even though it happened a while ago, are still at that point. They can kind of physically remember being there or doing it. And so there's a lot of stuff pointing at it. Now, like, to bring this back into modern day, just because a lot of things are pointing at something on the internet doesn't mean the original source is valid or good or not just totally made up. I mean, it could be a very great apocryphal story that just is true because we've been repeating it for a very, very long time, and not because it was true when we began. But there is a lot of stuff pointing at it. And I'm saying that because I'm scared of David, but also because I think there's a lot there is a lot of evidence kind of backing up this thing, even though the original is not there.
One of the signers, John McKnight Alexander, basically recalls it from memory. Like, he says, okay, well, if we don't have it, I was there, I signed it, this is what I remember. And then he rewrites it and sort of passes it down to his son. And that's sort of how it becomes this document that can get recirculated again. And it's, how much can you remember from memory? But part of that still exists because of that.
And if you're writing it after the big Declaration of Independence and you're writing it from memory, maybe you recall a few of those phrases that Thomas Jefferson put a little more eloquently than you might have.
Yeah.
And in fact, we have the provenance, as you were saying, Kellie, of this new version of the Mecklenburg Declaration. But you also have John Adams, who sees this Mecklenburg Declaration after it's recirculated. And he says, I saw that newspaper article, and I'm pretty sure that was a real document. Jefferson must have copied the Mecklenburg Declaration for his declaration. And John Adams hated Jefferson, so this was just beautiful turn of the knife.
And of course, Jefferson pushes back on that. And I think, Jefferson we can kind of cast as one of the biggest skeptics of the Mecklenburg Declaration in the kind of early part of the 19th century, around the early 1800s. But yeah, I mean, when you have the supposed Mecklenburg Declaration using phrases like dissolve the political bands which have connected and absolve ourselves from all allegiance to the British Crown, which are word for word what appears in the actual Declaration of Independence, you kind of have to ask some questions there. I think you also have to ask some questions about the kind of Virginia-North Carolina beef. And I'm sure some of that had to do with Jefferson wanting to pour cold water on this whole situation as well. Mm-hmm. There's one kind of incredible turn in, the 1820s and 1830s when a lot of these, investigative commissions are being put together to figure out, the provenance of this declaration. And one of the final reports includes a list of 28 men who they claimed had signed the document. Many of them still alive. It's not that far later. It's only 50 years or so later. And apparently none of the so-called signers actually then said, had actually done so when people followed up. And I mean, how many times have we seen kind of like big announcements or press releases that list, that gussy themselves up with experts and stats and figures, and then like reporters just scratch a little bit and they're like, wait a minute, none of this is true. So it's just a reminder that people have always looked to kind of like legitimize their claims with all of these stats that are sometimes just spun out of thin air. Mm-hmm. But I'm really fascinated by how in the first couple decades of the 1800s, it does seem like there's an attempt to really couch it in a kind of like historiography. Like they convene panels to do interviews. They have like, I don't know if there's peer review at that moment, but it is just this interesting thing of like the project of history. They're very academic about it. And I wonder if that's because they realize what's at stake. Like, we have to move this from oral history and sort of stories that people tell to something that feels a little more concretized.
I mean, I think there's an attempt to do that. And I also think it kind of really happens around the time when the Civil War breaks out. And this is like, oh, look, we've always been people who would stand up to the government, to stand up to injustice and that sort of thing. I mean, like Jefferson Davis comes to Charlotte and is like, look what these folks did. We're carrying on in their spirit. I mean, it's probably no, accident that when they create the flag's created in 1861. And so this revolutionary spirit is sort of born again, but in a very different way. And what you're seeing, I think, is sort of this, with the over the course of time, people know what the date is if they've seen the flag, or they're like, why is this date on the flag? They know that's the celebration, but there's so much that happened in between the actual time that it happened and now that you kind of miss sort of like the meaning of it originally maybe being turned on its head.
Yeah, I think that Civil War moment is particularly important because we've talked on the show before about how when the Confederate States were creating their Constitution, they basically just like went through the U.S. Constitution and changed a few pretty significant things, but they kept the same structure of it. And I think they did so for the same reason that you get this callback to the Mecklenburg Declaration during the Civil War, which is to say, hey, we are the true heirs of this founding moment. We are not radicals coming up with new ideas. We're actually the ones who are staying true to the spirit of the revolution. And in fact, for all this talk about Boston, North Carolina was there first, and creating that kind of lineage is extremely important when they're trying to found this new Confederacy.
Yeah. Creating those narratives happen almost in that very moment. But the fact that they're happening about 100 years later, I think should all tell us something about like story making and myths and legends, and like how we create these ideas that give us either comfort or make us a hero or give us some sort of stake that maybe we might not have had before. But over time, those things get legitimacy, and the things that would have kept it sort of a little bit more faithful get eroded.
All right, well, let's wrap up here, Jeremy, with what you started with. You're the one who said it. North Carolina loves to be first. It loves to tell itself some of these stories. I got to tell you, my daughter, who's about the same age as your daughter, 7.5, we've started to look at license plates very closely. We have a whole list of license plates we've seen. And just a couple weeks ago, she walked up to me and said, "What's the deal with Ohio says birthplace of aviation and North Carolina says first in flight? What's going on there?" And so I'm sure this is like North Carolina rabbit hole 101, but I think it does get into this larger idea of like North Carolina does seem to like to proclaim these things. So whether it's aviation or the Declaration of Independence, kind of like what are your thoughts there about how this fits into the larger story of the Tar Heel State?
Yeah, it actually is rabbit hole territory. I wrote a whole thing about the license plate and how we're right and they're wrong. But and I say this as somebody who was born in Ohio. When you put the right flyer backwards on the license plate, you don't know your stuff. So that's all I'm going to say. But I mean, it is we are we're first in flight, we're first in freedom. I mean, like around the time when the 200th anniversary of the MeckDec came out, North Carolina put first in freedom on their license plates, and it didn't last very long, but we were very proud of it. And so I think when you look at the Revolutionary War, or you sort of look at the long arc of history, you tend to think, oh, that's all concentrated in the Northeast. Like all of that stuff happened up there. So when, like you're saying, you walk around these cities, Boston, Philadelphia, you still feel sort of maybe that fighting spirit that's there. And when you look at North Carolina, you're like, no, a lot of important stuff happened here. We were very vital to what was going on. We were sticking up for ourselves. We were being kind of ornery in a way, but we really fought for what we wanted. I mean, into the way that we ended up kind of ratifying some of the documents that came later. We didn't do it right away. We held out. And so I think that was one of the things that really, really matters here to North Carolinians, is that we have this history. And it's interesting to be in Charlotte to see that, because I think as somebody who lived in Charlotte for about 10 years, I make the joke that, okay, I moved to Greensboro after 10 years, but, that's when I moved to North Carolina. I didn't really live in North Carolina until I left Charlotte. But this is a point where you can look back and you say, you know what, this is maybe when all of this area was the most intertwined, that we really feel our history. And I know there's a big party planned for the 250th in Charlotte. It's going to be a big time, even if you can't find it. You can find the party. I think you'll be able to find the party. You just won't still be able to find the document.
I have to say, North Carolina is there between Virginia and South Carolina, which get all the attention. And when I was living in Virginia, I learned the saying, North Carolina is a valley of humility between two mountains of conceit.
Oh.
And we might have to revise that with all this first in freedom, first in flight stuff. I feel like they're leveling out of that valley.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? If you can do it, it ain't bragging.
So, yeah, I mean, this ties into, of course, the beginning of what will be a huge year next year with the 250th. We are planning a whole series of coverage around that. But I think what you just said is kind of what I find really compelling about this is, it's a look at what kinds of stories are going to get solidified, what kind of stories are going to get destabilized, what kind of stories are going to get completely invented out of thin air using this hook. But I think I'm hearing from you that there is Zero chance North Carolina has a nuanced conversation about whether that date should be on their flag, and perhaps it comes off.
It's going to stay on, I think. People...
They're going to make it bigger.
There were two NC State students who a while back were like, hey, you know what? Our flag's okay, but what if we redesigned it? And everybody was like, no, go away. Get out of here with that.
Fair enough. All right. Well, look, Jeremy, this has been really great. Jeremy Markovich, the newsletter is North Carolina Rabbit Hole every Thursday, right?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so people should go subscribe to that. We'll put a link in the show notes. We'll also put a link in our newsletter on Substack and cross-post and so forth. But thank you so much for doing this. This is really fascinating.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And happy 250th.
Same to you.
Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.